In 2021, the most iconic gun brand in American history was sold to a foreign company, not a British company, not a German company, a Czech company, from behind what used to be the Iron Curtain, a factory that spent 40 years under communist control, making weapons for the Soviet bloc, churning out guns for armies that were pointed directly at the United States. That factory now owns Colt. Let that sink in for a second. The gun that won the West, the single-action army. The 1911 that American soldiers carried through 2 world wars. The M16 that defined a generation of American warfare. All of it, the name, the brand, the legacy, now belongs to a company from a country that Ronald Reagan would have called the enemy. And here's the part that makes this story truly remarkable. The Czech company that bought Colt didn't stumble into it. They built toward it deliberately, over decades, through one of the most unlikely corporate transformations in the history of the firearms industry. This is the story of CZ, and how a communist-era weapons factory became one of the most dominant forces in the global gun market. Born behind the Iron Curtain. To understand CZ, you need to go back to 1936. Czechoslovakia was a young democracy, barely 18 years old, sandwiched between an increasingly aggressive Nazi Germany and a Soviet Union that had its own ambitions for Eastern Europe. The government made a decision that would define the next century of Czech industry. They needed to manufacture their own weapons, on their own soil, without depending on anyone else. Česká zbrojovka, Czech Arms Factory, was established in the town of Uherský Brod in the Moravian region of Czechoslovakia. The location was deliberate. Uherský Brod sat in the eastern part of the country, further from the German border, harder to reach by air. If war came, and everyone in Prague understood that war was coming, the factory needed to survive the first wave. It didn't matter. In 1939, Nazi Germany occupied Czechoslovakia entirely. The factory that had been built to defend Czech independence was immediately conscripted into the Nazi war machine, producing weapons for the Wehrmacht. Czech workers in their own factory building guns for the army that had just conquered their country. That was the first occupation. It would not be the last. When World War II ended in 1945, Czechoslovakia was liberated, but not free. Soviet influence replaced Nazi control, and by 1948 the country was firmly behind the Iron Curtain. The factory in Uherský Brod was nationalized. Private ownership was abolished. CZ became a state enterprise, producing weapons for the Warsaw Pact, for Soviet-aligned militaries across Eastern Europe, Africa, and Asia. For 40 years, CZ made guns for the other side, and here's what's remarkable about those 40 years. They got very good at it. In 1975, CZ engineers released a pistol that would eventually become one of the most respected handgun designs in the world. The CZ75 was chambered in 9mm, held 15 rounds, and featured a double-action/single-action trigger system, with an ergonomic grip that fit the human hand better than almost any competing design. It was, by almost any objective measure, an exceptional pistol. Accurate, reliable, comfortable to shoot, and mechanically elegant. Gun writers in the West who managed to get their hands on one, which was difficult given that Czechoslovakia was a communist state with limited commercial exports, consistently rated it among the finest production pistols ever made. The problem was that almost nobody in the West could buy one. Export restrictions, Cold War politics, and the general inaccessibility of Eastern Bloc manufacturing kept the CZ75 largely invisible to American and Western European consumers throughout the 1970s and 1980s. It was a great gun that existed in a parallel universe. Then the wall came down. When communism collapsed in Czechoslovakia in November 1989, in what became known as the Velvet Revolution, CZ was suddenly a state-owned weapons factory in a country that was rapidly dismantling state ownership of everything. The question wasn't whether CZ would be privatized. It was who would end up owning it and what they would do with it. What followed was a decade of post-communist turbulence that would have destroyed a lesser company. Ownership structures were contested. The newly formed Czech Republic and Slovakia split in 1993, creating complications across every state enterprise that straddled the border. Markets that had been guaranteed under Soviet central planning evaporated overnight. CZ survived it. More than survived, they used the chaos as an opportunity. With the CZ75 now freely exportable to Western markets, the pistol that had been quietly excellent for 15 years suddenly had access to the customers it deserved. American shooters who discovered the CZ75 became instant converts. The gun that had been made for Soviet-aligned militaries turned out to be exactly what American competitive shooters, concealed carry permit holders, and firearms enthusiasts had been looking for. Sales grew. The reputation grew with them, and CZ's management, now operating as a private company in a market economy for the first time, started thinking about what came next. What came next was acquisitions, lots of them. Through the 2000s and 2010s, CZ Group, the parent company that owned Czech Republic, went on a methodical, largely unnoticed buying spree. Dan Wesson, the American custom pistol maker known for high-end 1911s and revolvers, was acquired in 2005. The brand was repositioned as CZ's premium American offering, giving the Czech company a foothold in the U.S. custom market. Zbrojovka BRNO, another historic Czech arms manufacturer, came into the fold. Little by little, CZ was assembling a portfolio of firearms brands across multiple categories and multiple countries. American gun owners who noticed these moves at all tended to shrug. CZ was a good brand. Dan Wesson made nice guns. Nobody was connecting the dots into a larger strategic picture. Then, in 2021, CZ Group announced it was acquiring Colt's manufacturing company for approximately $220 million. The reaction in the American firearms community ranged from surprise to outright disbelief. Colt, the company Samuel Colt founded in 1847, the maker of the Peacemaker and the 1911 and the M16, was being purchased by a Czech company that most American gun owners couldn't have found on a map 10 years earlier. Here's what the shock obscured. This acquisition made complete strategic sense, and CZ had been building toward exactly this kind of move for 20 years. Colt had been through two bankruptcies, 1992 and 2015. The company that had defined American firearms for 170 years had spent decades being mismanaged, underleveraged, and unable to capitalize on its own legacy. The brand recognition was extraordinary. The execution behind it was not. CZ brought something Colt's various American owners had consistently failed to provide: operational competence, manufacturing discipline, and a long-term perspective unclouded by the short-term extraction mentality that had plagued Colt through its private equity years. CZ also brought something less tangible but equally important: genuine respect for what Colt represented. Where Cerberus had looked at Remington and seen a balance sheet, CZ looked at Colt and saw a legacy worth protecting. The 1911, the single-action army, the Python revolver. These were not just products to CZ's leadership. They were the reason the acquisition made sense in the first place. Since the acquisition, Colt's product quality has stabilized. The Python, one of the most beloved revolvers ever made, discontinued in 1999 and relaunched in 2020, has been consistently well-reviewed under CZ's ownership. The 1911 line continues. The single-action army continues. The name on the barrel still means something. Step back and look at what has happened to American gun brands over the past 30 years. Remington, destroyed by private equity. Marlin, hollowed out and sold. Winchester, manufactured in Japan and Belgium. Colt, bankrupt twice, now Czech-owned. The pattern is consistent, and it raises a question that the American firearms community hasn't fully reckoned with. Who actually takes better care of these brands? The American investors who buy them for their balance sheet value and strip them for parts? Or the foreign companies who buy them because they genuinely understand what a firearm legacy is worth? CZ didn't buy Colt to extract value from it. They bought it because a Czech company that spent 40 years making guns behind the Iron Curtain, then rebuilt itself from scratch in a free market, understood something that American private equity never did: that a brand built on 2 centuries of precision and pride is worth more intact than in pieces. The factory in Ursky Brod that Nazi Germany conscripted and the Soviet Union nationalized is now the custodian of the most American gun name in history. Samuel Colt, who died broke at 47, probably couldn't have predicted that either. Nobody saw it coming. But looking back, it makes complete sense. If this story hit you, drop a comment below with what you think about foreign companies owning American gun brands. Is CZ good for Colt, or does it bother you? I want to know. And if you want more stories about the guns, the companies, and the deals that are reshaping American firearms history, subscribe and ring the bell.